Hello, it's Andrew. I've been doing a few YouTube videos over the last couple of months. So here I'm back with another one. This one's a book review. A book that I finished reading a couple of days ago. If I hold up the cover there, not necessarily the clearest of titles, but the book is called Conservatism, Burke, Nozick, Bush, Blair, and it's by Ted Honderich. Now, Ted Honderich, for those who don't know, is regarded as one of Britain's leading philosophers, possibly even a world-famous philosopher, which means that perhaps many people haven't actually heard of him because, fortunately, we live in a culture where sort of celebrity gossip is considered to be more important than deep thought, but that's probably another subject. Anyway, just to explain why I've read the book, it was first published in 1989 and I read a copy in 1990. I actually exchanged letters with Mr. Honderich because I had some ideas about the book and wrote to him, and he kindly wrote back. I'm not quite sure whether his reply was genuine or sarcastic, actually, but I don't know. Anyway, that's probably not relevant. Anyway, so the revised edition came out in 2005, and it's a book that I've been thinking about reading, and I recently bought a copy and read it. Now, the first thing to say, it is a bit heavy going. I read a lot of politics, which I like reading about. This is more sort of the philosophy of politics. I don't read philosophy, so maybe this is how philosophy is. So I did find it a bit heavy going at parts, but it is actually written in quite an interesting style, and he does have a nice turn of phrase and quite satirical and quite amusing, and he is, well, obviously he's very clever, and he's good at explaining things. Just to explain, well, that's basically what it is. The book is an attempt to, it's an analysis of conservatism through the thoughts and actions of the Conservative Party in Britain and also the Republican Party in the USA. To explain the subtitle, he mentions four people. Edmund Burke, who's one of the great, regarded by the Conservative Party as one of the great thinkers. He was sort of writing a couple of hundred years ago, more than a couple of hundred years ago now, and wrote a book about the French Revolution. Robert Nozick is an American who sort of came to prominence in the 1980s. Now, this is where I disagree with the mainstream. People talk about neoliberalism as sort of like the new version of conservatism. My thoughts is basically neoliberalism is a polite word for the Thatcher, Reagan, Pinochet wild extremes of capitalism, which with sort of quite big tinges of fascism. I mean, neoliberalism is, well, I mean, basically, as a word to describe conservatism, it's meaningless because it mentions liberalism, and it's, well, again, that's another subject for another day, but it's a particularly vicious doctrine as far as I'm concerned. Now, moving on. Bush is George Bush Jr., who was president of the USA at the time this book came out, and Blair is Tony Blair of New Labour. Now, the point that Honderich makes is he assesses conservatism, and he is of the opinion that perhaps we can say basically was the New Labour party of Tony Blair, which basically ditched socialism for electability or for Blair's and his cronies' egos, actually a form of conservatism. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute, but first of all, just to one, if I can show this, I do like to show bits of the book. I bought this as a second-hand book off Amazon. I was quite pleased to find out I've got a signed copy. Now, it wasn't advertised as such. I do, as a book collector, like signed copies of books. Now, what Mr. Honderich does is he looks at conservatism through a series of, and it's conservatism's approach to a series of subjects. You've got change, you've got theory, you've got human nature, freedom, government, society, equality, and something called dessert. Now, when I first looked at the book, I thought, dessert, does that mean it's like the pudding at the end of the read? But no, dessert is the idea that people get what they deserve. Um, Now, as I say, I'd read the previous edition, so I kind of knew what he's trying to do. Honderich is find what is the essential rationale of conservatism. So he looks at its ideas on a whole load of subjects and sort of assesses them. Now, I won't give away his conclusion. Um, when I first read the book, I thought, yes, that's a good conclusion. Now, I don't actually agree with it so much. I mean, I've actually written, little plug for myself, I've written a book called Why Not Trust the Conservatives, which is a critical history of the Conservative Party in Britain. Now, my book takes the premise, basically it's just the history of the party from 1830 through to the present day, and looks at its record in government and parliament and its internal organisation. What Honderich does is he looks basically at conservative thinkers and writers, and quite a few of whom I was already familiar with. A few that were new to me, and assesses conservatism from their point of view. Now, I don't necessarily agree. Well, it sounds a bit what's the word I'm looking for? It might sound a bit sort of extravagant, saying, "Oh, yeah, he's a great philosopher," but I don't agree with his method. But he makes the point several times that one of the things that conservative writers pride conservatism on is its lack of belief in political theory and ideology. So I'm thinking, well, if you're going to assess a political ideology, theory, party, spectrum, whatever you want to call it, and that theory doesn't place much reliance on theory, surely it would make more sense to look at it from its actual practical actions. Now, see, at the moment there's 320 Conservative MPs in Parliament. I doubt that more than a very small minority of them have read Burke. I should think very few of them have read Nozick. I suspect that they know something about Disraeli, but they probably know about the myth of Disraeli rather than the truth of Disraeli. They probably all worship Thatcher. But I think you can get a better telling of what the Conservative Party is like, or conservatism as a doctrine shared with Republicans in the USA, by actually looking at people's political actions rather than their theories. One of the people he actually mentions is Roger Scruton, whose book The Meaning of Conservatism I read about 30 years ago. That really was, well, I just thought it was nonsense, the book. Apparently Scruton thinks of himself as it's an exact phrase, but basically he's been described as the non-thinking man's thinking man. So he articulates the thoughts of people who don't really think much. So I do take issue with Honderich's possibly the way he's approached this. I do, on the other hand, think he has got a lot of very interesting things to say about conservatism. Just that perhaps he could say better things if he widened his scope from sort of the theory to the action. Now, to come back to New Labour, when the book was published, this update in 2005, Tony Blair was still Prime Minister. I think, I don't know, I haven't actually read any contemporary views, but I suspect his idea that Tony Blair was a sort of small c conservative might have seemed a bit odd. Now, 11 years on from Tony Blair no longer being Prime Minister, but he still pops up regularly on the media to commentate on politics, Brexit, and what he sees as the poor state of the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn's radical leadership. I've got no time for Tony Blair. I think he's got nothing of relevance to say to us. He did good things in government, the minimum wage, devolution to Scotland and Wales, peace in Northern Ireland, sure start, but obviously his legacy is the illegal war in Iraq and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, and basically he's got nothing positive to offer the Labour Party. So from my point of view, I actually found, partly because it's new and it wasn't bits that I've reread and stuff that I've read before, but the sections on New Labour, basically at the end of each of those areas that I outlined, he then does a little piece about reflecting New Labour, and he talks about, for example, the inequalities of wealth and the fact that New Labour wasn't doing anything to really challenge these, and the fact that New Labour got so swept up in the egos of Blair and his cronies, and their own self-importance, the spin, the propaganda. I just, well, as I say, I actually think this probably is quite a good characterisation of the Blair era Labour Party. But as coming back to the book, I say it can be a bit. I mean, I don't know. People who read philosophy might find it quite straightforward. It can be a bit of a challenging read. I say he has got an interesting style. It's just sometimes as he sort of ploughs his way through the arguments, sort of summarises the arguments that certain conservative theorists have put, and then he puts the arguments against them. The book's just over 300 pages long. I think probably it could have benefited from being shorter. So it's a good read, and I'm pleased I've read it. I think it stimulated some thought in myself, and obviously this is something I've wanted to share with the world via YouTube. So I'll leave it there for now, and thank you for listening. And anyway, my final message: if you are interested in conservatism, hopefully from a critical viewpoint, then this is a book. It is worth reading. So thank you and good night.